Hi, my name is Finn. I'm a flight instructor in the UK, and welcome to one of my videos in my series called Grounded, which is all about things you can do while you're stuck on the ground when you can't fly for whatever reason. Maybe you're trying to do your PPL and the weather is just not playing the same game that you are, and you can't get up there. It's really frustrating, but what all these videos are about are making good use of that time that you spent on the ground. So when you do actually get up in the air, it's a bit easier, all goes a bit faster, and you can probably do your PPL in less time than you would have if you'd not done this training on the ground. So today we're going to talk about the radio, RT, radiotelephony. You might hear it called various different things throughout this video and throughout your flying. And it's one thing that I find really sometimes trips up students and can sort of delay their progress on, because you'll find your instructor won't be able to send you solo unless you've got a really good high level of RT. And same when it comes to the navigation, and certainly before they'll send you for the test, you need to have excellent RT by that point. So I think one of the things I see pilots training for their PPL do a lot is rely on the time they're talking on the radio in their lessons to practice their RT, which is good. But actually, even if you have a couple of lessons a month and say you make, I don't know, half a dozen radio calls a flight, by the end of the month, you might have spent a cumulative time of about 2 or 3 minutes on the actual radio practicing that skill. And it's nowhere near enough to get up to a good standard. And what I see all the time is my students flying along perfectly, and then as soon as their thumb goes anywhere near that transmit button, the aircraft starts moving in a different direction. They're losing, gaining altitude, and they're just not become a bit more of a passenger than a pilot while they're talking on the radio. Or perhaps even if they can manage to fly straight and level and in a straight line while they're talking, they maybe have to ask the controller to repeat quite often, or make mistakes in understanding what's being said, or read back the wrong things, or even just use the wrong words or say it in the wrong way. So what we're going to talk about today is things you can do utilizing the time that you're spent on the ground, so that next time your thumb comes anywhere near that radio button, it doesn't take up so much capacity, so you've got more capacity to fly the aircraft. And next time your thumb comes near that button, you know exactly what to say, exactly what the other person's likely to say. And all we're going to focus really today on is how to practice that and how to develop those skills. If you're looking for a full video about how exactly to say every little thing, this probably isn't it. I'm going to do one later. I'm going to do a series of videos on radio, or if you're watching this in the future, maybe I already have, and check out my channel for a bunch of videos on how to use the radio and what vocabulary to use. But this one's all going to be about what you can do and how to practice at home. I think the thing is, what we need to do is we need to look at using the radio in the same way as we would look at learning a language. And when you go and learn French, you go to French lessons and you go home and you practice your French. What we're trying to do at the moment is we're trying to learn French while we're in like a driving lesson or something, while we're trying to do something else as well, and it's just not going to work. So you need to really devote some time to this. And so what we're going to really break this down at is, much like a language, how do we learn the right vocabulary to use? How do we learn the correct grammar? And how do I get better at speaking and listening? So the real aim of this is to show you ways to get that information and to ways to practice it. So next time you turn up your lesson, you can shoot off that RT like a machine gun, like your instructor does, and really impress them and make your flight lessons a bunch easier. So let's get started, shall we? The first thing we're going to focus on is then speaking, and I'm going to break that down in a couple of different parts. So we're going to try and first look at how we can improve our vocabulary. Now, the radio quality, by the nature of aviation radios, is a bit poor, and that's why we use really specific words that have a big meaning. One word can often mean, if I was to say it in plain language, about 5 or 6 different words. And so we use these really specific words deliberately. It's also really important to use the right vocabulary for brevity, so that we use the shortest amount of time on a radio, so we can be really precise, so there's more capacity for other pilots to speak on the radio as well. So it's really important to make sure we're using the right words. So places to find the right words, well, there's this big Bible and it's called CAP 413 and it's about 365 pages long, which would take me about a whole year to read. So I'm not at all going to suggest you read anywhere near the whole thing. I'm just going to point you to a couple of pages in particular. Page 9 to 11, in fact, I've got them up here. If you just Google CAA CAP 413, you'll be able to find this pretty easily, and it will bring up the radiotelephony manual like this. And these are the pages I want you to read first. Page 9, 10, and 11. I've got all these just standard phrases here, like affirm or affirmative, which means yes, but can't be confused with anything else, like yes can. And don't forget, the reason we use these specific words as well is because a lot of people on the radio might not have English as their first language, so then they might find stuff easier or harder to say. And it's been worked on over not hundreds of years, tens of years certainly. So I just want you to have a scan through these couple of pages and just get to know these words, like negative, the word for no, or you notice how it says here out and over, and it has a star next to them both, which we scroll down to the bottom here says it's not normally used. We don't normally use the words over and out, but we do use words like Roger, which is just means I've received your transmission, and Wilco is a really, really great word for stuff that doesn't need to be read back. It means I understand your message and I will comply with it. And you see how it's one tiny word, 2 syllables, and that means so much. So that's the first thing I want you to do. Just go spend a little bit of time, maybe 5 minutes with those words, and just check you know all that vocabulary. The next thing to do is there's a shorter version of CAP 413, which is essentially our Bible, that is devoted to general aviation. So the problem is actually, it's the CAA produced it a while ago and they don't really have it up on their website anymore. But if you Google CAP 413 GA supplement, you will find it. It'll be one of the top hits. I think I've stolen this one from Take Flight Aviation Flight School in the UK. And so this brochure is really good because it's way shorter than the big manual of CAP 413. It's in colour, pictures, easy for it's more my sort of level. And actually what it does is it will just break down what a sort of standard radio exchange might be in the kind of flying we're doing between a pilot and an air traffic controller. And it tells you all the reasons around it and behind it. So I really recommend it. It's not the shortest of manuals, but it's really, really good. You're going to get a lot from reading it. So definitely go out and hunt that. And if you can't find that one as a European version, which is going to have some slight differences because it's more standardized and we do things annoyingly but acceptably different in the UK. And if you Google eGast radio telephony guide for VFR pilots, you should get to this page and end up downloading this document, which looks suspiciously similar, as if it was written by the same person or same team. And this is slightly more up to date, but not all of it's exactly applicable to the UK. But again, a really great manual to read, and this will give you a really good breakdown of what your call should look like and what words you should be using. And that's the real thing we're focusing on here, is just get used to do a bit of homework and get used to what word you should be using. The next thing I want you to do is think about improving your grammar, and that's the way you structure your calls. So where does the call sign go? When do you use their call sign? And you should be able to get this from the GA supplement or the VFR guide from eGast. But also there's a couple other things I want to draw your attention to. There's one more page I want you to read in the horrible CAP 413 that's really big, and that's just the items that you have to read back. Because there are some items that you're not going to have to read back, so don't waste your time in a radio reading them back. You can just reply with Roger or Wilco. And then there are other things that you really do need to read back, and if you don't read them back exactly, air traffic control will just ask you to read them back again. So that is page 27, which I've got here, and this is the list of things you will need to read back to an air traffic controller. So I want you to just get to know these, and if they ever say anything to you that's not on this list, you don't need to read it back. Use brevity, nice short callback, Roger or Wilco, whatever's appropriate. Another thing about the grammar that I see pilots doing wrong every time is using numbers incorrectly. Saying 1,200 feet instead of 1,200 feet for an altitude. Or maybe doubling digits up for transponder codes like 3430 instead of 3430. And this will immediately put the hairs on a examiner's neck up. And the thing is, all we're working towards here is impressing that examiner. We don't want to give them any reasons to think that we're not really good at what we do. And using correct RT is a really cheap, excellent way of impressing your examiner and your instructor, so that they are more likely to give you a pass. And if there's anything that's marginal later, they might think, oh God, they couldn't really use the radio, I'm not really impressed with this. They might sort of err on the side of giving you a partial pass or a fail instead of a pass. So look, get to know exactly how to use numbers, and this is detailed out for you in Cat 413 pages 6 to 9. But it's also in the EGAS radiotelephony guide. It says at the top here exactly how to use, exactly how to use different numbers. And then if you go to the radiotelephony manual, if I go up to the top here, it tells you exactly, after the phonetic alphabet, exactly what the numbers should sound like and how to use them. So definitely have a look at that and double check that you're doing that correctly. A couple of things on speaking, that's pronunciation. So how you're actually saying those words. And this is more about how to practice in real life. Next time you phone up and you have to give your postcode or your name, I want you to get used to spelling it out in the phonetic alphabet. And that's the NATO phonetic alphabet that we're using to be pilots. If you're not sure where to find that, again, you can Google it. It's all over Google, but also it's here in the radiotelephony manual up here. So instead of when you're spelling out, say I'm spelling out Finn, instead of in the olden days before I knew my phonetic alphabet, I might have said forest, insurance, nape or something like that. When actually I want you to get used to using the phonetic alphabet and spelling things out properly, and maybe practice spelling your name and your surname and maybe your address, and get used to use some of these words. Some of the trickier ones are normally Quebec. Is a harder one to pronounce. Don't forget, you don't have to make the Q sound because this is an international phrase. It just has to be Quebec. And what are the other ones? Juliet, sometimes people will trip over. I'm not quite sure why. And people often forget the ones near the end of the alphabet, Victor Whiskey, X-Ray Yankee, and Zulu. So get used to those as well. And really immerse them in your day-to-day life. Start practicing these. Other ways to practice is practice your radio calls out loud. Sit down, if you've got a friend or even on the phone you can do this. Just practice the kind of calls you would make in your flight lessons. Maybe you're on your own. You can also say the air traffic controller's part. And this is really good because this is going to get your head in the mind of the air traffic controller as well, so you understand what they need to hear from you. Other things you can do to practice, if you're a flight simulator fan, get yourself on VATSIM. If you have no idea what that is, Google it. This is where you can there's lots of people who will be simulating being an air traffic controller, and you can log your flight simulator onto it and talk to them as you fly around on your simulator. And actually, everyone I've ever taught who's used VATSIM has had excellent RT from the get-go. So I'd really recommend it if you're into flight sims. So that's a bit about speaking and how to practice it and where to find the information to improve your vocabulary and your grammar and your pronunciation. Next I want to talk about is listening. And sometimes this is the hardest thing. We get really good at speaking and we can rattle something off, and then this voice that's really crackly and horrible and unintelligible comes back to us in our earphones while the engine's running. It's hard to hear and it's hard to really work out what on earth they're saying. And actually, this happens when you learn any language. We will all have remembered that first time we go to a foreign country, we've learned how to order something in a restaurant, and they rattle something back at you and you've no idea what they said. And I think there's two things with this. First is just knowing the possibilities of what they can say. So getting used to that GA supplement or the EGAS guide or Cat 413 will let you know what kind of replies you'll expect from air traffic control. That'll make it easier for you to understand what they're going to say. And then the other thing I want you to do is get yourself on YouTube. You're already on YouTube now. I want you to go and maybe watch some people that have filmed with ATC audio their flights around the UK. One of my favourites, who I just want to shout out now, is the Flying Reporter. If you want to be super nerdy, go and check out. He's gone behind the scenes at a couple of different air traffic control towers and a LARS facility at Farnborough. So go and check out his videos. Really great, and he includes a lot of air traffic control audio. And just get used to those calls and how they're going, what he's saying, what they're saying. Get used to how those voices sound on those crackly microphones. Next thing to do is get yourself a little handheld radio, a little airband receiver. If you go to Amazon now and type in airband receiver, you'll pick up something, 50, 60 quid or something like that. And you'll be able to just tune into your local airfield's radio. Hopefully you don't live too far from one. Even if you can't seem to manage to get the reception where you are at home, when you go to your lessons, you can, when you're waiting for your instructor to come back, or get there a bit early or stay a bit late, you can have a little listen to the RT on the radio there. And that's a really good way of practicing the specific calls and the specific replies you're likely to encounter at your airfield. And another thing to do, and I love this one, is go and listen to some ATIS, which is the Automatic Terminal Information Service. So you may or may not have used this yet in your lessons, where you, before you go flying, you listen to an automated recording of the weather and probably some operational information about the aerodrome. So you don't need a radio to go listen to these. You can go phone them up. And in fact, if I just Google ATIS phone numbers, here's one web page that's just advertising a bunch. I called a bunch of these today. Some of them are out of date and just rang out, and others of them worked. So I really recommend having a little listen and get used to how this sounds. Some of my favourites on here are the lid one, because there's some danger areas around there, so I'll give you some information about that. Also the Bournemouth one has the ATIS, and it also has a TAF number there as well. And Red Hills, one of my favourite ones to phone up as well. And they've all got slightly different voices, but they're all going to be saying a similar sort of thing. So what I want you to practice doing is phoning them up and writing it down on your kneeboard, just like you would at the start of your lesson, before you go and request clearance anywhere. And then once you've written down from the phone call there, I want you to go and check your answers. Go and find the METAR report that it's based on. And if you're not quite sure how to do that, just Google the airport you put in and the METAR, and you'll come up with hopefully the weather, which will make up the bulk of what's on that ATIS. If you want a real challenge, if you think, oh, Finn, this is really easy, go and have a little listen to it said by someone whose English isn't their first language. Go and call the Letuke ATIS. It's not quite right on that website I showed you here. This is the correct number down here on my presentation. And go and get used to listening to these things and just get better at listening. So, what have we spoken about today? We've spoken about how to practice listening, getting good at hearing what's going to come back at you. We've talked about how to make sure you're using the right grammar, how to make sure you're using the right vocabulary, make sure you know all the words for the exact sentences, and how to practice it as well. So maybe get yourself on VATSIM if you're feeling brave, or just find someone else at your flight school who's at a similar level with you and just be like, hey, can we do a study session where we practice some RT? And look, I really think this will be an excellent use of your time. You're going to come to your next lesson and feel much better prepared to speak on that radio. If you've got any comments about this, if you think I've said something wrong, or if you particularly like what I've said, let me know. Comments down below. You can email me, flywithfinn@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram @flywithfinn. And let me know how your practicing your radiotelephony went. Enjoy it when you do get in here.